In this video, we want to talk about some command line basics and why is the command line important? Well, command line is a very useful tool, especially in the industry. Sometimes you'll be given servers that you have to manage and they may not have a GUI or a user interface, graphical user interface. So what we see here on the screen, how we can interact with the desktop and all these fancy buttons and things, that's a user interface or a graphical user interface. And the command line is something that we would see in a terminal. So this is a way that we can interact with the file system and things on the system without having like an actual user interface. So for instance, if you don't have a GUI, you may have SSH access set up to your machines at some point where you have to log into them, configure them, do things, create files, edit files, check services, etc., etc. So I just wanted to go over some command line basics, some very simple operations just to get yourself familiar with using the command line. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up a new tab here because I just want to highlight kind of just a give an overview of what the command line has involved. So what you're going to see here at the top, I'm using Kali Linux. This little display here is different depending on your setup. It could be different depending on the type of Linux distribution that you're running. Again, this is Kali Linux, but in general, typically what you're going to see is the username. So this is the user that you're currently executing commands as, the @ symbol or a symbol here. Then there's going to be your host name. So this is the name of the host that you're actually on. So the machine is actually called Kali as well. And then the current directory. So this tilde here kind of, or squiggly line kind of displays the home directory. So if I use the pwd, that's the print working directory command, you'll see I'm in the home of the Kali user. And again, that's kind of what this little squiggly line here indicates. So first thing we can do is how do we move around the file system? So let's say if I'm in the home directory and there's other folders that are within the home directory, how can I get to those other folders to see other files or do things within those directories? To change the directory, we're going to use the cd command. That is change directory. So this is how we can move from folder to folder. So for instance, if I type cd and press enter, nothing's going to happen because I didn't specify a location I want to go to. Now, I have created a folder within this directory called test. So I can cd into test, and you'll see that the current directory that I'm in updated. So up here, you'll see /test. So this is again home /test. And if I pwd to print the working directory, you'll see home Kali test. So let's say I didn't mean to go into test and I need to go back one directory or go up one directory. I can do cd space period, press enter, and that will go back one directory. So whatever's before the current one, which is test, it'll move back into this home Kali. And if we print working directory again, we'll see that. If we are anywhere on the system, we can actually use this cd squiggly and it will go to this home directory as well. So let's just say we were in, home Kali test 1, test 2, test 3, like very nested down into a directory. Then we can do this cd followed by the squiggly mark and we can get back to our home directory if that's what we want to do. On top of that, we want to see what's inside of a directory. So let's cd into our test directory again. And then I'm going to use the clear command. The clear command will basically erase all the console, clear the console. So I'm going to hit clear to erase that. That just makes it a little bit neater. If we want to see what's inside of this directory or list the files within it, we can use the ls command. And that's going to list the files within that current directory. Now, if we want some more details, you can see here, all we can see is the one file that we've got created. If we want to see more details, we can do ls followed by a tac space and then tac l or -l. And that's going to give us more information about a file. Now we're going to go over what all of this is in another video, but basically these are file permissions and information about this file that we have created here. Let's say we want to see hidden files. Now, what is a hidden file? Hidden files are a way that some people will try to hide certain files. Again, sometimes there are files actually built into like a Linux file system. that aren't by default visible to the user, typically because the user doesn't interact with these files. They could be sensitive, but hiding a file using this method isn't necessarily a security feature, so I don't want to kind of misspeak and make you think that just because a file has a hidden attribute that it makes it secure. It doesn't. Oftentimes, again, it's kind of used to keep things out of the user's eyes that they may just not need to interact with. Honestly, it kind of helps with organizing things. If you're not going to be interacting with certain files or folders, often you can hide those. That way they just don't show up whenever you list files, so that you don't have a bunch of files and generating a ton of noise. So nonetheless, a hidden file. So what we see here, we did ls-tac-l, right, in the above command, and all we see is test.txt. Well, by using the tac-a, that's going to list all files, including the hidden files. So if we do tac-a and press enter, you'll see that we have test.txt and this period passwords.txt. So within a Linux setup, creating a file prefixed with a period will actually hide that file. So now if we wanted to combine the tac-a and l, we just do like that, and that will list details about all the files, including the hidden files. So if you're doing a competition or you're given a machine that you're supposed to kind of harden or make more secure, or if you're, offensive and you're on a machine and you're looking for, in this instance, passwords.txt that somebody, they made hidden, so they think, no one will find it because it's hidden. Using that ls-al, sometimes you can find some goodies there. So something to think about whenever you are securing a machine or whenever you're doing offensive stuff and you get access to a machine. Make sure you use that tac-a. That way you can always print out all the files. And then if there's nothing interesting and you just want to kind of hide the noise, then you don't have to use the -a. But it's always a good idea to start with -a just to see what's there. And then you can always remove it, as needed going forward. So let's say we don't have a user interface and we just have command line. And what we've done here is we've changed into a test directory using the cd command. We've listed the contents of that directory. We even showed hidden files. So let's say we found this passwords.txt file and we want to know what's inside of it. How can we read that file? I'm going to use the clear command. That way we kind of clear the console out, making it neater. And what we can use for this is the cat command. So the cat command will actually display the contents inside of a file. So let's say we want to cat this passwords.txt file. And one thing you'll notice is within the command line, which you often have is called tab completion or autocomplete. You can use tab and it will actually complete that for you. If there are multiple files, let's say, that start with pass, and I were to hit tab, it would kind of give me an option to select between the various ones. But in this case, we only have one file, so we can use tab to autocomplete that. But if we use cat passwords.txt, we can actually print out the contents of passwords.txt. In this case, it's just one line that says, "You found me." So let's actually add to this file. That way we can do some other things. How can we add contents to a file? Well, there's actually multiple ways you can do this. One way is using the echo command. So without adding this to a file first, you'll see where I kind of did this beforehand. But if we were to type echo hello world, what that's going to do is echo or print out hello world. Well, that's great, but that doesn't save it anywhere. All this does, if you don't add anything to the end of this command, is it will just print it to your current console. So what we can do in order to add it to a file is we can actually use this the append operator. And the way you do that is by two greater thans. So if we append hello world to passwords.txt, press enter. Now if we cat passwords.txt, oh, that's what I did. I put a /. Let's remove that really quick. I was wondering why the tab completion wasn't working. There it goes. So now let's cat passwords.txt, and you'll see we have two lines in there. If we wanted to remove or overwrite this entire file, we would just use one greater than. So if I were to put just one greater than, and I say the only content here now, then if we were to cat this file, you'll see that there's only one line. So in order to get back to where we were, let's add a few more lines to this. Let's add line 2 data, and we're going to add back the second greater than so that we append to it. We'll do line 3 data. And by the way, you can use the up arrow and that will cycle back through the history of your command line. So we're going to add line 4 data. Now if we were to cat passwords.txt, you'll see the only content here now, line 2 data, line 3 data, line 4 data. Okay, great. So we showed how we can read the contents of a file and write things to a text file, which is great. But let's say this is a really, really long file. Okay, so let's say this is hundreds and hundreds of lines long. Maybe it's a log file, for instance, and we really only want to see either the very beginning or the very end of that file. Well, how can we do that? Well, there's actually 2 commands that will show the beginning of a file and the last lines of a file, and that is the head command and the tail command. So if we were to use the head command on passwords.txt, you'll see that it printed all of these out, and that's because by default, it's actually going to print the first 10 lines. So if we had 15, it would have only printed the first 10, but because we don't have 10, it actually printed everything, which isn't really a great example for this. But what we can do is we can add an operator in there. We can use the -n tag, and let's say we only want to print the first 2. So n, think about n as like the number of lines that you want. So if I had -n2, I'm going to print only the first 2 lines of that data. All right. In a similar way, we can use what's called the tail command. The tail command is going to print the end of that file. And what I did here is I actually cleared the console. That way we can have a kind of a fresh look at this, but we can use the -n operator with tail in order to do just the last 2. So I'll print the contents of passwords.txt again, just so you can see it. And then if I tell -n2, it's going to print the last 2. Now, I do want to clarify something. -n indicates the number of lines. So -n2, we're printing the last 2 lines. You can also use, there's other operators that you can use with this. So if I use tell -help, I can actually print the help statement for this, and you'll see that there's other tags, other switches that we can use with this. -n is printing the number of lines. We can do bytes, etc., etc. There's various things you can do here. Oftentimes what you'll do is lines. For instance, if we're looking at a log file and we want to see, hey, what were the last 3 things that happened, right? We can use the tell -n3. You can always change it to the -c if you want to look at bytes instead. But oftentimes, more than not, I use the -n switch instead of the -c. All right, next what we want to do is there's another way that we can look at really large files that are sometimes too long or too large to view in one console. So let's say we had a file with a lot of lines in it that wouldn't even fit in our console. How can we look at that data? Well, let's just get an example. So I found this list of city names just on GitHub. This is just a test file. So what we're going to do is download this file, and we can actually do a couple different things here. So by default, this is going to go into our downloads folder. Well, let's say we want to move it into our test folder. And we're going to get to viewing the contents of this first, but I want to show how we can move a file around the operating system as well. So if we want to copy that file, we're going to use the cp command. All right, so if we copy, and let's go to our user's home, let's go to downloads, and what was the name of this file? This file was list. We can use that. The tab complete, and then if we just use a period, so the syntax for this is copy the source location, a space, and then the destination. So where do you want to copy this to? By using the period, what I'm saying is I want to copy it into my current directory. So the destination in this case would be the test folder, right? We're copying to our current directory. So if we copy that here, now we use ls, we can see there's now list.txt. Let's cat this list.txt file, and you'll see it's extremely large, right? And it went fast, and I couldn't see everything. Sometimes you don't have the ability to scroll. In this case, we can scroll up and down if we want to, but let's say we want to kind of skim through this without having to scroll up and down. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use a command called the less command. And so what this will do is view that file, but with pagination. So we can use list.txt. Whenever we hit enter, you'll see it fills the console and then it stops. And in order to go through this, all we gotta do is press enter. And what we'll do is we're actually gonna keep going down. So this is a nice way that you can view a file without having to scroll up and down. If you want to kind of go line by line starting from the top, you can use the less command to do that. I'm going to hit Control C. Actually, I think we need to use the Q command. If you press Q on the keyboard, it will actually leave that less console, so that way you can exit out of it quickly. One thing to note here is that we use the CP command, and again, that's going to copy it. So it's going to create a copy. So if we were to remove CP and change that to a cat command and remove this period at the end, you'll notice we can still cat that file in the downloads folder. Why? Because using CP creates a copy of it from this location and puts the copy here. If we were to use the MV, this will actually move the file. So it'll actually like rename a file as well. If in Linux, if you want to rename something, you just use the MV to move it to its new name. But we can move that file to here as well. And now if we were to try to cat it from the downloads folder, you'll notice there's no such file because we moved it, right? It's no longer there. So if you think about using a graphical interface and dragging and clicking and pulling something from one location to another, that's what the MV command is going to do, right? It's going to move it. Again, let's say we want to rename something. We actually use the MV command for that as well. So if we move list.txt to cities.txt, you'll notice list.txt is no longer here because we moved it, or we kind of created a new file with a new name, essentially. So we've shown how we can create files. We use the echo command to echo contents into a file. But what if we just want to create a file but not actually echo any contents into it? We can use touch. So touch is a way that you can create a new file. So I can just say, let's name this new_file.txt. And if we ls, you'll notice that now we have the new underscore file. So touch is a way, if you don't want to echo contents, what you could also do, you could echo just a blank into new file.txt. Kind of the same thing there, a little bit different, but essentially accomplishes the same task. But an easier way to do that is just using the touch command. All right, so we've shown how to create files. What about directories? To create a directory, we actually use the make_dir command. So mkdir command will make a directory. So we can make a directory called subdir. And now if we ls, you'll notice that the subdir, at least from the command line, is lit up with a blue. Another way to do this is if we do the ls-l, again to list more details, you'll notice that the directory always has a D at the very beginning of all these file permissions instead of a dash. So files will have a dash and directories will have a D, and that way you know it's a directory if you don't have this kind of color coordination going on. If you try to cd into a regular file, so if we try to cd change directories into test.txt, you'll see it'll tell you it's not a directory. But we can cd into subdir, and again, remember our current directory updated. If we ls, there's nothing here because we haven't created anything inside this. If we want to go back one directory, remember we use cd ... That'll take us back to test, and we're back to where we started. So using make_dir is a good way, easy way from the command line that you can make a directory. All right, let's say that we want to see what's within, or we want to search for something within a file. So we have our cities.txt, right? We did a cat of this file, and there's a lot of data. But let's say we want to see if there's a certain city within this. So for instance, let's look for or grep for the city Chattanooga within the cities.txt file. Now, when we press enter, nothing comes up. And the reason for that is the string Chattanooga was not found within the cities.txt. However, if we don't specify to ignore case, this is going to look for an exact match. So it's going to look for, I should say a case sensitive match is probably a better way to say that. We can use the tag I, and that will say ignore the case. So if the word is all lowercase, if it's capitalized, if it's a combination of lowercase and capital letters, we can use tag I, and that will tell us if it comes up at all. And you'll see here we get very different results, right? So we found Chattanooga, Chattanooga Valley, East Chattanooga. We found various things within this file because we used the tag I versus just the straight up grep search. So if you are looking for something very case sensitive, obviously you don't want to use the tag I, but more often than not, I find that I'm using the tag I because I really am looking for, does this exist within a file? Just so you know, when we're using grep, we are searching within files. Okay, so we're not just searching a whole folder or an entire, nested directories or anything like that. We're looking within a specific file for that word or for that item. Well, what if we want to look for files themselves, right? So we're searching within files, but what if we want to see, hey, is there, for instance, that's ls.al, so we can see, is there a passwords.txt file, for instance? And in this case, we have two because I accidentally used the / earlier. So let's go ahead and remove that actually while we're here. How do we remove a file? We're actually going to use rm. So if we rm passwords.txt, it's going to remove this instance of passwords.txt and not this one, because remember, this one has a period in the front. So let's just remove passwords.txt. And if we ls al again, you'll notice that that is gone. But what if we want to search for passwords.txt? How do we do that? Well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to clear our console, and let's actually create another file. So let's touch, and we want to put this file within our subdirectory directory. So we're going to put let's do subdir, right? So that's the subdirectory that we want to create it in, and let's call this one passwords.txt. All right, so what we're doing is we're creating a file called passwords.txt within the subdir directory. So if we were to cd into subdir and ls, we can see passwords.txt is there. So let's go back, the cd back into test. And to do that, we just do cd space ... And we're back in the test directory. All right, so let's find within starting, so I should say, this first period here is we're saying starting within the current directory that we're in. All right. Starting with the current directory that we're in, let's find files with the name passwords. All right. And I'm going to do this because I want you to see what this looks like. You'll notice it didn't find anything. Well, that doesn't make sense, right? Because we know there's a hidden passwords.txt file here, and we just created one within subdir. So why did that not find anything? Well, this is kind of like what I said before. This is doing an exact search for passwords. If we were to look for passwords.txt, you'll see that passwords.txt was found within the subdirectory that we just created. However, the hidden passwords.txt that's within the test directory, this one here, was not found. Why is that? Well, again, it's still doing the exact search for that file name. So what we can do to get around this is we can use the asterisk to search kind of as a wild card. So what we're saying, if there's anything prefixing the word passwords, and then after passwords there's any characters, then we want to match on that as well. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so now what we were able to do was find hidden password files and the password files because we used this asterisk as kind of a wild card. Notice also we didn't put .txt or anything. So this is a really good way that, for instance, if this was passwords.txt.back, like a backup file, and if we were to look for just passwords.txt, we wouldn't have found the .back file. Actually, in that case, we probably would have, because it would have matched passwords.txt. But the whole point being, if you don't know what the extension is going to be, right, you can put that asterisk in there, and that way anything with the word passwords in it you will match, right? Maybe we just want to search password, which will also match because maybe we don't know there's an S, right? You get the point. The whole point is you can search for files using the find command in a recursive way based on the name by using the command above, and we can look for those wildcard operators. That way, if we don't know exactly what the file name is, we can still find some things that are close. All right, I know that's a lot of information. There are a few other commands that I want to show you very quickly. One of them being uname, and we can use uname tag A is a pretty common one to use. This is going to give you system information. So let's say you got access to a box or wanted to find out more about the box that you're on. You can use uname-A, and that's going to give you a lot of details about the specific system that you're on. If you don't use tag A, you're going to get more of like the maybe the common name is one way to refer to this, but it's kind of like the simple name here. But using the dash A, we're going to get a lot more information about our machine. So that's a really good way. Again, if you're just now on a machine and you're not 100% sure what system you're on, maybe you don't have a GUI, maybe you weren't given a lot of information like a cyber defense competition, or you're penetration testing and you get access to a box and you're like, hey, I need to know what machine I'm on, right? Because how I navigate around it, where are sensitive files, how do I configure this, what kind of exploits could be out there for my machine, what kind of vulnerabilities, right? If I'm blue teaming, I need to know what kind of vulnerabilities can be on this box. One thing that you're going to want to do is use that uname to get the information about the system itself. Now, all that's a lot of information. Again, the last thing I want to show you is the man command, and you already saw me use -- help. So for instance, -- help can give you the well, in this instance it didn't. We use -h. Okay, so there may not be any tags for PWD, so that's probably a bad example. Let's do, what about cat? Does that have any? Okay, so if we use -- or -- help after, I will say most commands, because we see it didn't work above, but if we use -- help after most commands, what we're going to do is print the help message. And the help message is going to give you an idea of different switches that you can use. Obviously, you can Google these or look these up in a browser. You can type in, Linux cat command help, and there's plenty of resources that will give you, details about what each of these things are. Another way you can do this is called the man pages. So man is in itself a command, but if you use man followed by the command that you're interested in, there's a ton of information, and what you'll notice is they use kind of like the less example, right? Where you can kind of page through these things. In this instance, they're telling you can use Q to quit out of that. But that's another way that you can learn information about the commands that you're running, learn more about them, figure out what switches are out there, because if you don't know how to use a command, then you may not, for one, be super efficient, you may misuse it, and that could have all kinds of repercussions if you did something wrong. So it's always a good idea to check out the man pages or the help messages. That way you learn more about the commands that you're using and can be more informed.